It was an ordinary afternoon when Clara, a young woman in her 20s, was on her way home after another day of work. She never imagined that her quiet and routine life would turn upside down so quickly. It all started with the news of a violent robbery that had occurred near the neighborhood where she lived. The entire city was talking about it. The crime was brutal, and the worst part was that the victim was a well-known person, which only increased everyone's attention. Clara, who had always kept herself away from trouble, could hardly believe what was about to happen. The day after the crime, she was at home when suddenly the police knocked on her door. With cold eyes and serious expressions, the officers said she was being accused of being an accomplice to the robbery. That caught her by surprise, like a punch in the stomach. "This is a mistake," she tried to say, but the authorities were convinced they had enough evidence against her. Without having time to understand what was happening, Clara was taken into custody. As she was placed in the police car, her neighbors looked on in silence, whispering among themselves. "I knew she was strange," an elderly woman commented. That premature judgment was just the beginning of the nightmare that Clara was about to face. The news of her arrest spread quickly. Social media exploded with comments, theories, and, of course, plenty of judgments. Clara's name soon appeared in the headlines of local newspapers, painted as a criminal. People remarked that she had always been too quiet, that she never socialized, and that this was already a sign that she was hiding something. The problem was that no one stopped to hear her side of the story. During the interrogation, Clara insisted on her innocence. She explained that on the day of the crime, she had been somewhere else, but she had no way to prove it. She was alone at home, which made the situation even worse. The only evidence against her was a security camera that showed a figure resembling her leaving the crime scene, along with a suspicious phone call that, according to the police, connected her to the main suspect in the robbery. But Clara had no idea who that person was. With the weight of the accusations on her shoulders, Clara began to realize that the system was stacked against her. No matter how much she told the truth, no one wanted to listen. Fear and insecurity consumed her, and she knew her future was at stake. Alone, she was thrown into a cold, empty cell, not understanding how she had ended up there. "Why me?" she thought. Justice, it seemed, was not interested in answers, but in blaming someone as quickly as possible to satisfy society's thirst for revenge. The hours dragged on in the cell. Clara, sitting on the cold floor, tried to process what had happened. The environment around her felt suffocating, as if the walls were slowly closing in on her. Her heart raced in her chest, a mix of despair and disbelief. The feeling of injustice weighed heavily, like an unbearable burden. How could everything have gone so wrong? She pondered. A few hours later, the iron door creaked open. A police officer called her for her first meeting with the lawyer the system had assigned to represent her. The middle-aged man looked tired, as if he were used to dealing with hopeless cases. He entered the interrogation room, opened a folder, glanced at the documents, and without even looking Clara in the eyes, began to speak. "We need to be realistic here, Clara," he said, his voice cold and practical. "The evidence is not in your favor. You were seen near the crime scene and the phone call doesn't help." Clara tried to defend herself, desperate. "But I wasn't there. I don't know that man. You have to believe me." Her voice was choked, almost pleading for a spark of compassion. The lawyer sighed. "Believe me, I've seen worse cases. The question isn't whether you are innocent or guilty, but how we can minimize the damage. If you cooperate, we might be able to negotiate a lighter sentence. If you keep insisting on your innocence, you could end up with more years in prison. Is that what you want?" His words felt like a bucket of cold water. Clara felt a lump in her throat. The thought of spending years behind bars for something she didn't do seemed unbearable. But how could she admit to a crime she didn't commit? This was her life at stake. And with each moment, it felt like the system, the people around her, even those who should be on her side, were turning against her. When the lawyer left the room, Clara was alone again, staring into the void. Outside, The city moved on, indifferent to her suffering. The headlines in the newspapers continued to exploit her image as the young accomplice of the brutal crime. Her friends and acquaintances began to distance themselves. "I never imagined she could do that," some said. "I always thought there was something strange about her," others commented. At that moment, Clara's loneliness reached its peak. Her world, which once seemed so stable and predictable, was now in ruins. She had been thrown into a nightmare, and it increasingly felt like there was no escape. She tried to stay calm, but how could she do that when the whole world seemed convinced she was guilty? The worst was yet to come. With no close family and no money to hire a private lawyer, Clara felt trapped in a maze with no way out. Each day seemed darker than the last. Her trust in a fair system began to fade, and the only thing left for Clara was a fragile hope, clinging to her truth. The days in prison passed slowly, each more painful than the last. Clara had lost track of time, and her mind oscillated between anger and despair. The hostile environment of the jail only worsened her situation. She couldn't sleep properly, always alert to the sounds around her, and the suspicious looks from the other inmates didn't help her feel safe. With each passing day, it felt harder to maintain her sanity. It was on one of those dark nights, while lying on the hard bed of her cell, that something unexpected happened. The guard, making his nightly rounds, stopped in front of Clara's door and called her softly. "Clara? You have a visitor," he said in a somewhat surprised tone, as if he didn't expect anyone to come see her. Clara stood up slowly, not understanding. Who could it be, she thought. Since she had been arrested, no one had come to see her. Her parents lived in another city, and she didn't have close contact with many friends. Filled with doubts, she was taken to the visiting room. When she entered, she was surprised by a familiar figure, a woman with grey hair, expressive eyes, and a gentle smile. It was Anna, a former teacher from the school Clara attended. They hadn't seen each other in years, but Anna had always been an important figure in Clara's life. Someone who believed in her potential and encouraged her to never give up, even in the face of adversity. "Miss Anna," Clara murmured, still incredulous. "What are you doing here?" Anna approached, holding Clara's hands firmly, transmitting a warm comfort. "Clara, when I saw your name in the news, I couldn't believe it. I know you, and I know you're not capable of what they're saying. I didn't come here to judge you. I came to help," Anna said, her voice firm, yet filled with compassion. Anna's presence brought Clara a sense of relief she hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time, someone believed in her, and this gave her strength to keep fighting. Anna continued, "I know a lawyer who can help. He specializes in cases like yours, where a person is wrongly accused. I've seen him reverse decisions that seemed impossible. His name is João, and he agreed to take your case." Anna's words ignited a flame of hope inside Clara. Until that moment, everything seemed lost, but the promise of a new chance made her heart beat faster. Although the path ahead was still uncertain, the mere fact that someone believed in her and was willing to fight by her side changed everything. "Thank you so much, teacher. I don't know how I'll ever repay you," Clara said, her voice choked with emotion. Anna smiled. "Don't worry about that right now. Let's focus on getting you out of this situation. The truth always comes to light, even if it takes time." In the following days, Clara was called again to the visiting room, this time to meet João, the lawyer Anna had mentioned. He was a middle-aged man with a serious but friendly demeanor. Unlike the first lawyer, João looked Clara in the eyes and listened to her story attentively, taking notes and asking detailed questions. "I believe in you, Clara," he said at the end of the meeting. "But it's going to be a tough battle. The system is against you, and the prosecution has painted a convincing picture for the jury. But I've seen worse cases, and we will fight. I can't promise miracles, but I will do everything I can to prove your innocence." For the first time, Clara felt that there was a real chance of getting out of that situation. Each day that passed, João worked tirelessly on the case, looking for loopholes in the evidence, interviewing witnesses and reviewing the statements that accused her. He was determined to uncover the truth behind the setup that had led Clara to prison. And so, while darkness still hung over her life, Clara began to see a small light at the end of the tunnel. She knew the road would be tough and full of challenges, but with Anna and João's help, she had something she hadn't had before: hope. With João now leading the case, the investigation began to gain momentum. He started analyzing every detail of the evidence presented by the prosecution. There were many inconsistencies in the testimonies and evidence that Clara hadn't noticed before. João questioned everything, from the location of the crime to the time Clara supposedly committed the act. Each new clue revealed a strange detail, as if someone had set everything up to seem too obvious. Anna also helped, always present, visiting Clara and keeping her spirits high. Prison remained a suffocating environment, but the connection with João and Anna kept Clara strong. One day João brought exciting news. He had discovered a witness who hadn't been heard by the police. This was someone who could completely change the course of the case. João was preparing to confront the prosecution with this new information, eager to see how they would react to this missing piece of the puzzle. The day of the trial arrived, and Clara was more nervous than ever. The courtroom was packed, and the atmosphere was tense. João, confident, had a clear plan: to present the new witness, who could confirm that Clara was elsewhere at the time of the crime. When the witness, an old family friend, took the stand, Clara felt a wave of hope. The man began to recount what he saw on that fateful night. He had been at a nearby bar and by chance saw Clara coming and going at a time that contradicted the accusation. The room fell into absolute silence as his story unfolded. The prosecution, visibly nervous, tried to discredit the witness, but João was prepared. He asked direct questions, prompting the witness to further clarify his position. The tension escalated with every word. Clara watched anxiously, hoping this would be enough for her freedom. At the end, the judge called for a brief recess, leaving everyone in suspense. Clara's fate could change at any moment. After the break, Clara felt a mix of hope and fear. The judge returned to the room, and all eyes turned to him. The jury was back, and Clara's heart raced. The tension was palpable as everyone awaited the decision. João stood up, looking intently at the jurors. He began summarizing the crucial points of the case, emphasizing the lack of compelling evidence against Clara. The witness's testimony was vital, and he used it as a thread of hope to weave his argument. Clara felt every word reverberate within her. She didn't want to believe that she could finally be free. The prosecuting attorney, on the other hand, was desperately trying to undermine the new evidence, but the jury seemed impacted. Doubtful glances began to appear among the jurors, and Clara could sense that the scales of justice might be tipping in her favor. Finally, the judge asked the jury to retire to deliberate. Clara clasped her hands, her heart racing as she awaited the verdict. Time seemed to stretch into eternity as the jury deliberated. Clara was tense, biting her lips and glancing at the clock with every passing second. The room was silent, except for the distant sounds of murmurs and footsteps in the hallway. The anticipation mounted, and the adrenaline made her feel both alive and terrified. Finally, the judge entered the room again, followed by the jury. Clara felt her stomach churn. The judge announced that the jury had reached a unanimous verdict. All eyes turned to him, and Clara held her breath. "The verdict is not guilty," the word echoed through the room, and an immense wave of relief washed over Clara. Tears streamed down her face as happiness flooded her heart. The murmurs of the crowd waiting outside were drowned out by her own emotions. She had a chance to start over. As the guards approached to free her, Clara looked at her attorney João, who smiled at her, pride shining in his eyes. His fight had been worth it. Clara was free now, and ahead of her lay a bright future, With freedom finally in her grasp, Clara stepped out of the courthouse, feeling the fresh, rejuvenating breeze on her face. The crowd waited outside, but this time they greeted her with applause. Some people held signs saying, "We believe in you," and "Welcome back, Clara." She smiled at everyone, her soul light and full of gratitude. The fear and sadness of the past months felt distant, almost unreal. Attorney Jerome was by her side, and together they moved away from the chaos towards a future that seemed filled with possibilities. Clara decided to use her experience to help others who had gone through similar situations. With the support of friends and family, she founded an NGO focused on defending the wrongfully accused. Every day, she dedicated herself to helping those who lacked a voice, transforming her pain into hope for others. And so, Clara became a symbol of resilience and justice, proving that even in the darkest shadows, the light of truth can shine brightly. With courage and love, she was ready to write the next chapters of her life, now free from invisible shackles. Thus, Clara not only regained her freedom, but also found a greater purpose in life. Her journey taught her that even in the face of the most difficult adversities, hope and justice can always prevail. Through her work in the NGO, she turned her pain into a powerful force to help others facing similar injustices. If you were moved by Clara's story and her incredible journey of overcoming adversity, don't forget to leave your comment below. We want to know what you thought and how this story touched your heart. And of course, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next exciting stories we have prepared for you. Together, we can spread the message of hope and justice. Until next time.